Okay, good morning and welcome. This is the Tennessee Principal Professional Learning Series. And as many of you know, this is a program of 7 professional learning modules that's designed to provide information and hopefully support some professional conversation around topics that we believe are going to be immediately relevant to school leadership during the current public health crisis. My name is Jim McIntyre, and I serve as the Director of the Center for Educational Leadership at the University of Tennessee. And I want to thank Commissioner Schwinn and the Tennessee Department of Education for making this opportunity available to school principals here in Tennessee. And I also want to recognize the support of the content experts who will be presenting with us this week, as well as our philanthropic supporters. And that would include Instruction Partners, the American Institutes for Research, the Learning Accelerator, and Tennessee SCORE. So today's session is on personalized learning. And it's organized around our recorded video presentations that will explore how to lay the foundation to provide excellent differentiated instruction for our students, and some specific strategies for how to individualize that instruction to meet the needs of each child. You'll have an opportunity to explore a personalized learning school case study and also to have some small group discussion among your peers. As we delve into the topic of personalization, amidst the current national dialogue on racism, discrimination, and disparity, I invite you to consider and reflect upon how personalization of instruction and student learning might be utilized as a tool to enhance equity and address achievement gaps in our schools. You can access all of the resources for this session at our website at the Center for Educational Leadership, and the web address is shown on the current slide. You also see the progression of the Principal Professional Learning Series, and we're in Module 5 on personalized learning for students out of 7 modules, and we hope that you'll join us for all of the learning modules this summer. At the end of this session, there'll be a survey link that I'll put into the chat box, and we hope that you'll take the survey and give us feedback. It's important to us that this is an excellent learning experience for you, and we want to be able to continuously improve this experience. It's also important that you take the survey so that the Tennessee Department of Education will know which year to allocate your tassel credit to, either the current year or the coming school year. We're honored today to have Emily Freitag and Chrissy Turner from Instruction Partners as our expert presenters on personalized learning. And we're also grateful to the folks at the Learning Accelerator for all the resources and the support they've contributed to today's sessions. We'll begin with a video presentation on what works in setting the foundation for personalized learning. And the video will run about 15 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity for some small group conversation. And I'll share that video with you right now.
Good morning, this is Emily Freitag with Instruction Partners, and I'm so pleased to be joined today by
Chrissy Turner, former Tennessee school principal, and now instructional support with Instruction Partners for the state of Tennessee.
And today we are going to be digging into differentiation, personalization, and intervention. The central question is, how do we help support the learning for students who may have increased learning needs due to the distance learning of the prior year? In today's session, we're looking forward to digging into personalization, to really exploring the tensions at play in decision-making and what research suggests works as we are seeking to advance student learning, knowing that gaps have grown. We're looking to create clear mental models for the components of an effective instructional program, define aspirations for learning and culture, briefly understand the scenarios for the coming year so we can think about what does effective personalization in the context of the coming year look like. We are going to spend 15 minutes on research and principles of personalized learning. We'll break for discussion. We're going to spend 10 minutes on systems and structures to support personalization and practical implications for content, PD, and planning. We'll have a final reflection and then close out. And I wanted to start with a personal story. When I started as a 7th grade math teacher, I wanted so badly to do right by my students, and I gave them an opening assessment, and there were a number of questions about prior year's content. And many of my students struggled with subtraction, with regrouping on that assessment. It's a hard concept, borrowing, transferring the 10. And I, thinking that what my job was to help meet them where they were and move them forward, I stopped and I went back. And it was a hard month, especially for the students who already knew how to subtract. I spent a long time on prior grades content before I got into the curriculum for the year. And I regret the choice, because I regret what we could have been doing with that time. And as I reflected on my own teaching, I came to worry, as we think about the recovery in this coming year. I'm worried that we will face what might be the triple threat of inequity. Inequity already existed. Kids already have been coming to teachers with varying levels of unfinished learning. And extended time out of school, no doubt, will make it worse. What we need to guard against is that our instructional response to those gaps doesn't then make it even worse. Like in my story, that what I did as a teacher actually further grew the inequity between my students and what they needed to be learning and doing for that grade. And so we set out at Instruction Partners to learn what do we know about what works to accelerate student learning, and what do we know about what we often try that does not work. And we really wanted to explore the different kind of camps of instructional practice. I think as educators, we're often bombarded by people telling us, here's the thing to do. And whether that is differentiation, or blended learning concepts, or intervention practices, or project-based learning, mastery-based progression, competency-based education, SEL. And these different camps can feel like they are vying for our allegiance. And instead, what we really wanted to do is talk to people that might be represented with some of these camps, but across a wide spectrum of education, to understand what do we know and what is cross-cutting. And so we have done a number of interviews. We have many more coming. We still have much more to learn. And I will confess, I was hoping that this was going to be simple. I was hoping that we were going to hear simple moves that usually work. So much like right now in the context of coronavirus, this idea of just wash your hands for 20 seconds. Like, that's sticky, that's simple, we can all remember it. I was hoping we would find something like that for education. But much like the context of fighting a virus, I did not. I found that there were no quick tricks or simple solutions. There's no winning camp. However, thankfully, I did find that we do know a lot and that the themes are cross-cutting. I heard the same thing over and over again from a number of different voices and perspectives. That doesn't mean we don't have much more to learn, or that I don't have more to learn. However, we did hear common themes. And so let's look at what those are. Across all of the interviews, what we heard works is affirming and loving relationships. Relationships matter so much to learning. They matter to personalization. The context of the relationship is what allows for personalization. Second, belief in the capability of every student and accountability to their learning. We found across many different interviews that the success of an effort, the success of a research study frequently came back to the belief of the teacher and really the drive of the teacher to ensure that that learning happened for every single student. Complex, no doubt, but essential and cross-cutting as well. Third, coherent, challenging content and curriculum. We see across different schools of thought on personalization that having a spine of effective content and well-designed content is critical. Otherwise, the intervention becomes spotty. Fourth, data from multiple sources, especially dialogue. We dug into this in class 4, but across the different interviews, it was just very clear that there's no one test that will tell you everything you need to know about a student, and it is going to be interactive learning about students that inform effective instruction. E, effective instruction informed by an understanding of how to teach that content. Richard Elmore has often said, we cannot talk about teaching outside the construct of the content that we are teaching. How we teach fractions is going to be very different than how we teach argument writing. And teachers have to understand the nuances of their content in order to personalize instruction of that content, because they need to understand what are the different pieces of the content at play and where is each student in that learning. And frequent feedback. So often students are getting grades without getting feedback on why they got those grades. And across all the different interviews we've done, the role of effective feedback was very clear. I take some comfort in this list. I take comfort in a list that reminds me of the complexity of teaching. I take comfort in the fact that it's not simple. I also like seeing the motivations that brought so many into education so clearly matched with the research on what matters most. For the visual learners, what this might look like in summary is that we need an effective instructional core, quality content, effective teaching, engaged students, wrapped in belief in the capability of every student and accountability to their learning, wrapped in affirming and loving relationships. Personalization is a mindset more than a strategy. It is a mindset of ultimate accountability. I don't mean accountability like testing accountability. I mean personal accountability to the success of a student. What we saw does not work. One, teaching skills in isolation. Even the best developers of complex blended learning, computer-based programming admitted that when you take kids out of relationships, their learning suffers. There is no way to engineer learning experiences in isolation that will lead to student success. It is a complex, interactive process. 2, using a single source of data to sort and label students in a way that is permanent. It has incredible identity risk in addition to ineffectiveness in instructional practice. 3, teaching different things in intervention and core instruction. If we disconnect the learning, the effectiveness lowers. 4, omitting critical content with a strong research base, in particular phonics. And 5, neglecting motivation, not paying attention to what is motivating a student. Those are the things we often try that we found did not work. Over to Chrissy to talk a little bit more about some of the tensions at play.
There is a central tension that we see educators and leaders grappling with, and that is, should I meet students where they are, or should I start on grade level and hold a high bar? Much like Emily, I think back on instructional decisions I also made as a second grade teacher. Now, my intentions were strong. I sought to differentiate assignments by reducing the rigor with that strong belief in that I was supporting my students. I was making the best decisions for them. But instead of believing that my students could access that grade level curriculum and begin with grade level standards and scaffolds for support, I was perpetuating inequity by not providing them access. So we see this again through data. We know that our instructional choices lead towards meet them where they are. Significantly more instructional time is spent off grade level than on grade level. In classrooms that are majority students of color are more likely to be in classrooms that never see a single grade level assignment, more than classrooms that are majority white. We know that when students that start off the year behind are given more grade appropriate assignments, the gap between these students and their higher achieving peers narrows substantially. I'll pause a moment for you to reflect upon this quote. So moving forward, that does not mean that we should ignore unfinished learning. And as John King shared, we need a balance. There is a danger when students never get exposed to grade level work because you are in a downward spiral. You keep trying to go lower to provide something that students will be able to master, and then they're not exposed to the kind of content that will actually push that learning forward. There's also a danger in behaving as though those gaps that students have don't matter, and that you can get them to succeed with grade level work without ever addressing those gaps. And so there's this balance that is needed. The research suggests that starting on grade level content and addressing those gaps through instruction of that content, rather than changing the base content, is more likely to accelerate learning than stopping and going back.
And so if we had to summarize our version of wash your hands for 20 seconds based on the learning across these interviews, it would be effective instruction of a quality curriculum in the context of loving relationships with accountability to every child. We are seeing personalization is a mindset, not a strategy. It's a belief that each child's learning needs need to be attended to until they are able to reach grade level work and succeed with it. It is not simply a set of strategies that will get us there. In the next section, we are going to talk more about what it can look like and what a system, for a system and a school, what are the conditions that do support personalization. But first, let's go ahead into small groups and let you all reflect on two guiding questions. One, what mantra, if any, is your system or school driving towards in the coming year? What is guiding your belief about how to organize instruction? And of the key themes that we shared about what works, what do you feel best about? And what do you want to focus on shoring up in the instructional core and interactions with students? We'll go ahead into discussion for 15 minutes.
Okay, so we'll stop there for a moment and we'll go into small group conversation. We'll actually have about 10 minutes for a small group conversation. And here are some of the questions that we're going to ask you to think about and talk about. So in terms of the key themes that Emily outlined in terms of what works for building personalization, what do you feel best about in your building? What do you think you need to shore up? What mantra, if any, is your school or school system driving toward for the coming year? And then I'd also like you to think about how can personalization be used as a key strategy to enhance equity, opportunity, and student success in your school. I did put the web address for the Center for Educational Leadership website in the chat box. And if you'd like to go and access Emily's slides so you can see that list of what works as you have your small group conversation, please go ahead and do that. It's under the Principal Professional Learning Series module number 5 section of our website at the Center for Educational Leadership. So I'm going to invite you to small group conversation right now. I will push a button that will send you an invitation. You accept that, you'll go to the small group, there'll be a facilitator there, and I will take you there right now. We'll have about 10 minutes for small group conversation to talk about this foundation for personalizing learning for all students. Okay, welcome back from small group. I know that was quick, but we'll have another opportunity in the session to do some small group conversation in just a little while here. But I wanted to get back to the second half of the presentation from Instruction Partners. I will say that this, the second part of the video is fairly conceptual and focuses on, what's the foundation? How do we create the foundation from an instructional perspective to be able to do personalization well? And so I think that's a really important conversation and aspect of the work. But then also we're going to move into, after this presentation from Instruction Partners, looking at some specific personalized learning case studies from specific schools that have been compiled by the Learning Accelerator. And so we'll have a chance to really dig into some specific strategies around personalized learning for our students, and perhaps make this even more concrete around particular strategies and practices that will allow for personalization of learning for students. So we'll go right now to the second half of the video from Emily Freitag in Instruction Partners. It goes about 14 minutes.
Welcome back. In the first half of the session, we talked about the commonalities that we found behind different approaches to personalization grounded in research. Essentially, that instructional core, quality content, effective teaching, engaged students, wrapped in belief in the capability of every student and accountability to their learning, wrapped in affirming and loving relationships. This is the interaction between teachers and students that forms the heart of effective personalization. Now we want to shift to talking about how leaders can create structures and routines and support systems that allow all teachers to have these interactions with students. What we're seeing this look like across the system starts at the top. The North Star is a culture of high expectations for every student and a clear vision of the aspired student outcomes, clarity about what success looks like. That is always important. That will be more important in the recovery from this interrupted schooling, because it's going to be more necessary to prioritize. And we cannot prioritize unless we're clear on the goal. That's the North Star. And leaders can do a number of things to create that. And they create it in every interaction they're having with teachers. In terms of structures and systems, at the center, we see that a high quality curriculum, high quality instructional materials, wrapped in support for teachers to use those materials, which includes training, planning support, and coaching, forms the core of your personalized system. We cannot know how to teach outside the construct of what we are teaching, and the curricular materials and professional learning provide that. In fact, we see that it is the power play, the combination of effective curriculum with PD on that curriculum is where we see the most outsized gains. That will be more true, not less, in the next year. And then at the bottom, this needs to be bolstered by a culture of support for teachers and conditions for effective adult learning, and clarity about the mission and the strategy across the school. That is what gives teachers the psychological safety to engage in the work. There are some fixtures of how schools operate that are not supported as much by the research. One is seat time, the second is grading, and the third is pacing progressions. These are things that we do that do not necessarily match to what we know about how students learn. Let's dig in a little bit more. I want to elevate for you 3 practical resources that create alternate models to how we could think about designing for personalization. The first comes out of Transcend Education, and they have a wonderful primer that really boils down learning science. What do we know about cognition, identity formation, motivation, individual variability, and what are the implications for learning environments for each of these pieces of research? There's more in this than I can go into in the time we have, but as an example, one of the things we know from research about cognition is that focused attention is needed for learning. And so what are the implications for learning environments that support focused attention? This Transcend piece goes through each of these. We'll go ahead and put this into the chat as a source that you can look at in more depth to look at some of the ways that we could redesign schooling around those pieces of research. AIR, who I know has presented a number of these sessions, has a number of resources on competency-based education. And they have distilled 6 features of effective competency-based education, including measurements of learning, clear learning targets, instructional approaches and supports, assessments, pacing and progression, and flexibility in where and when learning can take place. They have a number of resources that can be used, survey instruments, to better understand how much a current systems approach matches some of the best of what is known about competency-based education. And Learning Accelerator has a number of resources on blended and personalized learning at work that look at the interaction between in-person learning and technology, and a number of very good resources on mastery-based grading. What I will say across these break the mold models of personalized learning that have come across in all of my interviews is that this clear vision of aspired student outcomes is so critical as the foundation to do things like reorganize towards a mastery-based progression model. You can only do that when you are incredibly clear on what the gates need to look like. And that is something that many schools are still working on getting clear around, or are finding that they need to treat differently for different subjects. They might feel very clear on that for math, but less clear on it for ELA. And so what we have seen is that a curriculum can provide that clarity more directly than starting with the standards. So let me turn it over to Chrissy to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing as the heart of personalization through a curriculum.
The strongest foundation for effective personalization is quality curriculum with aligned professional learning for teachers. So what does effective curriculum-based personalization look like? First, it looks like having and using a strong curriculum. For many years in Tennessee and elsewhere, educators have had a fraught relationship with textbook developers, and too often curriculum felt like a square peg and a round hole. So in many places, curriculum selection and development was just essentially distributed to teachers without strong training and coaching supports, which led teachers to go elsewhere for supplemental materials. See, Teachers Pay Teachers, Pinterest, Google, different resources being pulled into the classroom. But we know that an effective curriculum is like a strong backbone for instruction. It doesn't do the job of teaching, but it can anchor instructional planning and ensure coherence. And especially in times of disrupted schooling, it can provide a common starting point for discussion and planning. While changing curriculum is complex, we've seen a number of school systems make the move even in distance learning, because without it, everyone's job was simply harder. So starting with a strong curriculum gives a system and a teacher a leg up. Then within the curriculum, we know that prioritizing content will be important. It may not be possible to get through 4 ELA units based upon schedules. So we need to determine what are the most important 3. May not be possible to cover every chapter of math. So again, which are most important to students' future learning? And then within each unit, teachers need to anticipate what they will need to do to respond to the unfinished learning from the prior year, and what they will do to scaffold questions and instruction for students with those gaps. And finally, if we want students to advance, especially when time is scarce, we need to give students opportunities to grapple with meaningful work with strategic scaffolds and supports in place.
And as Chrissy said, curriculum doesn't teach children, teachers teach children. And so while curriculum can be that backbone, we need to match it with effective capacity building for teachers to use the curriculum in ways that support the personal learning for every child. This includes helping teachers understand the priority content, what is most important. This includes helping teachers understand their curriculum and know how to use it. Going back to my own story, I had a curriculum that did show me that I did not need to stop and spend time on subtraction with double digits, and instead could do that teaching in the context of the unit about integers. It was right there for me. I did not understand how to use the curriculum effectively to do that. And so I made professional judgments that didn't help my students in that case, that were in tension with the curriculum that I could have been leveraging. So how we help teachers understand the curriculum and how to use it is essential to the act of personalization. It also requires us to understand how to help teachers use multiple assessments to target the most essential unfinished learning through the context of the content we're teaching, and how to give teachers time to collaborate across grade levels to understand what was missed before so that we don't overassess. What we don't need to spend equal time on in professional learning is how to target small group intervention or remediation that is purely about filling gaps. Small group intervention and remediation should instead primarily be focused on just-in-time supports in the context of the grade level content, as opposed to the stop and go back. This coming year is just going to be the hardest year in education. I know 1920 was crazy. I have to tell you, 2021 is going to be harder, because we know that we are going to have multiple scenarios likely of learning. There's a scenario where we have in-person primarily. There's a scenario where we are back to total distance. And there is a scenario where we have a hybrid model that is even more complex, with some students in school, some students at home. Next week, I know you will be focusing on this with ERS, and they have some wonderful resources and tools that help schools think about the combination of how to schedule, how to staff, and how to support instruction. But in all of those contexts, we know that it is going to be a healthy instructional core that will advance learning. There are no quick fixes in personalization. There is just complexity of effective teaching in the context of loving relationships. And that means as leaders, there's no quick fixes or simple systems that you can enact Instead, it is the hard work of creating a culture of high expectations, a clear vision, with effective materials wrapped in effective professional learning, supported by a healthy adult learning culture. I wish there was an easier way, but I think remembering what we do know about how to do this is also affirming as we think about the very important year ahead for students. So we'll send you into the final reflection to talk about, what do you feel you have in place? What do you feel you need to shore up? And what else are you thinking about? We wish you great success in the coming year. We are here together to learn one step at a time and have a good final reflection discussion.
Okay, great. So before we move to the next part of our session, and we will have some opportunity for small group discussion in just a few minutes. But before that, I'd ask you to take about 2 minutes for just personal reflection and thinking about some of the questions that Emily has posed and some of the content that has been presented, and to think about literally just for 2 minutes, give some thought and maybe take a note or two about, regarding what works in building the foundation for personalization. What do you already have in place in your school? What do you need to shore up? And what else are you thinking about in order to set the stage for personalized learning for your kids? So I'll give you about 2 minutes just to think on that, to reflect on that, and maybe take a note or two, and we'll have some time for small group discussion again in a little bit after our next segment. Okay, so hopefully you got a chance to think about those questions and maybe do a little bit of reflection. And we're going to move into the next phase of our session here. And this is the awkward stage where the host plays a recorded video of himself presenting. So bear with me on that. And then in a few minutes, you'll be asked to do some independent work and exploration and research on personalized learning school case studies. And you can find the resources for this activity on the Principal Professional Learning Series Module 5 page of our Center for Educational Leadership website. And I'll put that link in our chat box right now so that you have it. And we'll go to a recorded video around some of the more concrete strategies that some schools have put in place, and to be able to think about, what does this look like in a school context in terms of trying to lay the groundwork for personalizing learning for our students. Hi, I'm Jim McIntyre from the Center for Educational Leadership at the University of Tennessee. And I want to express our thanks to Emily Freitag and Chrissy Turner at Instruction Partners for sharing their expertise through their presentation. You know, it's a good reminder that from an instructional perspective, our foundation for personalization lies in excellent teaching of a strong curriculum by educators who believe in the efficacy of their students, and with all of that happening within the context of supportive relationships with young people. As we move into some examples of what personalization might look like in a school context, there are some potentially important structural decisions that we can make that will enable and facilitate personalized learning. Our friends and partners at the Learning Accelerator have a particular expert perspective on the potential of personalized learning in schools that we'll spend the next few minutes digging into. The Learning Accelerator sees personalization as a student-centered instructional approach that individualizes learning for each student based on specific strengths and needs, student interests, and individualized goals. Personalization invites differentiation of pace and path and place and even modality. It enables opportunities for greater student choice and agency. Personalization calls for the flexible allocation of resources, which might include time, content, space, student groups, and personnel. And personalization embraces the notion of self-directed learning. In a few minutes, we'll look at 4 examples of schools that have embraced personalization. Some of the personalized learning strategies and related dynamics that you might see in those examples include blended learning, where schools purposefully combine and align in-person and technology-supported learning, student-directed learning, individual learning plans and learning pathways, project-based learning, dynamic grouping strategies, timely use of data to inform teachers about instruction and students about their learning, and progression upon mastery. The Learning Accelerator also has some excellent resources available to everyone for free on its website, including case studies and specific strategies for personalizing learning. And we're actually going to spend some time there on the Learning Accelerator's website, which is on your slide here, for the next few minutes. So, for about the next 10 minutes or so, you're going to work independently to explore one of 3 personalized learning school case studies from the Learning Accelerator shown on the current slide. You're going to look at either Lovett Elementary School in Chicago, Cisco Junior High School in Texas, or Lindsay High School in Lindsay, California. You can access the link to these case studies, including a focus on a key personalization strategy, on the Principal Professional Learning Series Module 5 page on our Center for Educational Leadership website. I'll put the web address in the chat box right now so you can easily access that. And you can go to the resource document that's on that page to be able to access the links to these case studies. So choose one of these 3 schools, and you'll have about 10 minutes to find out what they've done to personalize learning for their students. When you come back and go to small group discussion in a few minutes, you'll be asked to share what was unique about the personalization strategy adopted by the school you investigated. Does the strategy or the strategies have the potential to enhance student learning? Might it address student engagement or increase equity? So please stay on the Zoom call, but you can mute your microphone and turn off your video as you do your research. We'll come back together in 10 minutes. Okay, so you'll have 10 minutes to do this independent research and exploration. I've also placed the links to the school's case studies in the chat box, and I'm going to share my screen here that will show the questions that we'll discuss in small group when we come back together. So just what did you find? Which of the school case studies did you look at? What was unique about the personalization strategy adopted there? Do these strategies have the potential to increase student learning, deepen student engagement, enhance equity? And which of these strategies might be useful in the current crisis, or which simply might not adapt to the current pandemic era? So you'll have 10 minutes from right now to go ahead and do this independent research. And again, you can stay here in the Zoom call. You can turn off your video and turn off your microphone and go ahead and do that research, and we'll be back together in 10 minutes. Okay, so I hope your research and exploration went well, and we're going to jump into actually working through a particular personalized learning school case study together for just a moment here, and then we'll break out into small group conversation and discuss some of the questions that are on your screen here, and really talk about the research that you've done, some of the strategies that you might have seen, and whether or not those might work in your school or in the current context. So I'm going to take us to the rest of video, and then we'll break out into small group conversation. Welcome back. In just a couple minutes, we'll break out into small group discussion to share what you discovered. But first, now that you've had a chance to explore one of the personalized learning school case studies from the Learning Accelerator, let's dig into a school case study together so you can see how personalized learning strategies are utilized in a specific real-world example. The case study we're going to explore together is Locust Grove Middle School in Henry County, Georgia. Locust Grove Middle School serves about 1,000 students in grades 6 through 8. Locust Grove's vision for personalized learning centers around educating the individual student by providing rigorous curriculum, personalized pacing, and multiple learning pathways that connect with students' strengths and interests. Students at Locust Grove experience personalized learning throughout their day. A student will have 8 periods per day, including 4 content classes, 2 electives, an assessment lab, and time in the makerspace. The assessment lab is twice the size of a traditional classroom, and students spend their time completing assessments and assigned online content, primarily supported by paraprofessionals in this setting. This unique organization of resources helps reduce class sizes in core classes and helps create more opportunities for teachers and students to interact in meaningful ways.
In my class, our big goal is that we make sure that we're giving every student what they need when they need it. That means that for my class, there's a difference in pace for however students learn. The students that catch on quickly have a chance to go deeper into the material and then also at times into the next section of material. Students that take a little more time get more time with me as well as more time to really focus and master the material that they're learning. The opportunities for me to go deeper into material, for me to get more personal with the students is something that is much better through a personalized learning environment.
Here at Locust Grove Middle School, we use a blended learning model where students are in seminar for part of the day and they're in lab for part of the day. So about half their day is in seminar sections where they have 3 academic classes, and then the other part of their day they're in the lab with the 4th academic teacher. When they're in a class size of 30 or 40 in a classroom, kids often don't want to ask you for help because they're embarrassed or they're intimidated by you, or they feel like there's not an opportunity to ask for help when they need it. And in the model that we're in, they can ask without fear of anything, really.
I just think it's important to give the students the opportunity to bring their own interests into the classroom and to allow them the opportunity to, move at their own pace and when they're ready and not be held back, or if they need additional time, not be forced to move forward. I think that's important for a student to learn and be successful.
It's allowing the child to buy into their own education. And so it helps us customize our teaching straight to that one student.
I do believe that they are absorbing the content quickly and more deeply. If we are doing a science experiment, they can come up with different versions of that experiment. Some of them actually do more hands-on. Some of them do a video. Some of them might even do a song about it. I am enjoying myself immensely doing this personalized learning.
Students at Locust Grove experience a great deal of personalization within their content classes. Students take pre-tests and post-tests before and after a unit to identify areas to focus their efforts, as well as their academic growth throughout the unit. Locust Grove Middle School has created a culture of both teachers and students using data to inform student learning and progress.
At the beginning of a unit, we use a pretest in every class, and depending on what the students already know, that determines where they begin on their learning pathway. A learning pathway is a tool that we use here at Locust Grove. It helps students be able to self-monitor their progress throughout the unit. So wherever they begin, they start with those particular activities. We also have something called learning targets, and those are student-friendly I can statements. So the students know exactly what skills they need to know in order to progress through the unit.
At the beginning of a unit, of course, we'll take our pretest. And then once we finish our pretest, then we'll go in and we'll do our item analysis, and we'll say how many we've gotten right for that specific learning target. So say it's like a question's about something in language arts, like about grammar, and you got 3 out of the 4 questions right, and you got 75% on that. So you didn't master that yet, but you probably be able to move on and not start at the very beginning because you've showed that you know some of that. So just by doing that sheet, you've showed what groups you've showed mastery in and what groups you need more help on. So the teacher can look at that and start you on what DOK level you need to be.
So once students are finished with everything in the unit plan that we have prepared for them, then we are checking with each student to see if they are prepared to make sure to go on to take a post-test at that time. And then we compare their post-test to their pre-test to see how they have developed and to see what skills that they've mastered throughout working with the unit.
At Locust Grove Middle School, a student's learner pathway will be modified based on what they know, allowing them to skip material they've already mastered. Students are also able to work at their own pace, moving faster or slower based on their need, and progressing ahead upon achieving mastery of the standards and expected competencies at the appropriate depth of knowledge.
You can go on to your online learning section. You can work on your Odyssey-ware, or you can work on your ST Math personalized learning path.
So our pathways, they have what you're doing in class. So if you have just finished your pretest and you need to start on your first assignment, or you need to do a small group, it's going to be listed on that pathway. So you do that, and then you just keep on going to where instead of writing it on the board and everybody asking questions about where they're doing, then you have that, and that tells you.
The learning pathway is designed around each individual student. So near the beginning of the unit, all students take some sort of a pre-assessment. And what we do is sit down and look at that pre-assessment with the student and have a discussion about the areas that they already came to the class with a lot of background knowledge. So if they have a lot of that background knowledge, then what we do is we sit down and we make a plan, and those students do not have to do those particular things because they've already mastered those. So their pathway is just what that individual student needs to have accomplished to show mastery of all the learning targets by the end of the unit. So it doesn't look the same for every student. It starts where they need to start.
The combination of individualized learner pathways, real-time data to inform teaching and student learning, progression upon mastery, and innovative use of time, space, and resources have allowed Locust Grove Middle School to effectively personalize the educational experiences of their students and accelerate their learning. I look forward to our discussion about these examples of personalized learning. Okay, excellent. We are going to have I'm back with you live now, and we're going to have a few minutes to go into small group conversation. And so again, we'll ask you to talk with your peers about what case study did you research and what was unique about the personalization strategy that you saw in the school that you investigated. Did those strategies have the potential to increase student learning and success? Might they deepen student engagement or enhance equity? And then which of the strategies that we've seen or talked about might be beneficial in the current crisis versus are there any that simply don't seem to apply in the sort of current pandemic era that we're in? So I'm going to invite you to small group conversation, and we will have about 9 or 10 minutes to have a discussion about these topics, and then we'll come back together to wrap up before the top of the hour. At about 5 minutes before the hour, we'll start to wrap up. So I'll invite you to small groups right now. Okay, welcome back. Hope you had a productive small group discussion and had some great dialogue. And we're going to just wrap things up here. I just put into the chat the link to the survey. Again, we'd love for you to take the survey. It gives us good feedback on making sure we can provide a great learning experience for you in the Principal Professional Learning series, and also allows the Tennessee Department of Education to know which year you want to allocate your tassel credit to, either this year or next year. So a couple of things we have left to do. One, let's just hear about some of the conversation that you might have had in the small groups at this time. So what I'd love to hear is just anything that you talked about in your small group that you thought might be useful for the whole group to hear. Any insights, any comments, any takeaways around this really important notion of personalizing learning for students. So if you'd like to share something, just turn on your video, turn on your microphone, and share with the whole group.
Some of our schools have been doing work on mindset, and they're finding now after COVID that work on mindset even more important as they're really trying to do the right thing for their kiddos, and yet really having to change practice and thinking.
Absolutely. No, it's a great point, Nancy. I mean, I think this, we look at these notions of personalized learning, and we know that these are really helpful and valuable and probably necessary in this moment of crisis where we may be in a hybrid situation, or we might be in a remote learning situation again, but we recognize that it's a huge transition, and it's a very big shift for our staff, for our teachers, for our kids, and our families. And so I think being able to have an open mindset, a growth mindset around some of these issues when we're going to have to make some pretty considerable transitions to serve our kids well is going to be incredibly important. It's a great point, and I appreciate you sharing that. Other thoughts, takeaways, anything else to share from the small group conversation?
Dr. McIntyre, from our small group, one of the takeaways was across the board in all the case studies, relationships just played a major role in the effectiveness it appeared. And that was reassuring because it's something we surfaced in earlier modules that is something we do well here in Tennessee. A couple questions that were brought up were, number one, how long did it take them to train the teachers to be able to modify the curriculum to meet the learner needs? And then secondly, all the case studies were talking about what appeared to be fairly advanced learning management systems. And we're wondering, that costs money, and we're wondering about those as resources. So those are just some questions that came up.
I think they're really important questions. I love the piece about relationships because that is so important. And I think Emily talked about that in the first part of the video in terms of, what the basis for all of this is, the prerequisites for all of this is high quality instruction with a strong curriculum grounded in supportive relationships with kids. And I think that's really important. And I think there's a question of capacity here, and how do we build the capacity? How do we make the shifts that we need to make? How do we make the transitions that we need to make if we're going to do even more around personalizing learning for our students? And those are really important, legitimate questions. And I think that's part of why we're here, is to grapple with those questions, to think about what the possibilities are, and see if there's an opportunity or really a necessity in this moment of crisis to be able to make some of those transitions, to build some of that capacity to do an even better job of personalizing learning for our students. So yeah, in some cases, the schools that made this transition had a long runway to ramp up this effort. We don't have quite as long as a runway if we're thinking about making some of those transitions for the fall, but we can at least move in that direction and begin to take steps toward that. Great questions and great insights. Other thoughts, other ideas, other takeaways before we wrap up our session for the day? And I certainly invite our cohort members to share, but also if any of our facilitators had anything that seemed like a great insight to share with the group, glad to hear from them as well.
Dr. McIntyre, just something quickly here for our group. What I enjoyed hearing was this kind of arc of kind of skepticism. Some of these schools that we're looking at, the case studies, are fantastic schools. They got a lot of funding. Even the elementary one that I looked at, some of they got a $280,000 grant. Not all schools will have that opportunity.
Right.
And yet there was a sense of optimism in terms of innovation and a time to be innovative and a time to make some changes. So I enjoyed hearing that from our group, and Dr. Rouse can also speak to what she heard as well.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. And I think you see some important themes, particularly around student voice and agency in a lot of these schools, and students having choices and having ownership over a lot of how their learning progresses and how they interact with the content and their own learning. So yeah, no, I think you're right. There, these are some great exemplar, case studies, but there's also a great deal to be learned there. But also, we have great assets in our schools as well that can really help us to personalize learning for students. Dr. Davis, one last comment before we wrap up.
Yeah, I'll make this quick, Dr. McIntyre. In our group, we talked about the need to encourage our teachers to become warm demanders. And basically by that term is that teachers need to convince kids that are coming to them with those skill gaps that they can actually do on grade level rigorous work.
Mm-hmm.
But then once you convince them, you also have to have the wherewithal to be able to hold them accountable for doing that work. And sometimes we have a tendency to, when kids come from disadvantaged backgrounds, they have the skill gaps, we have the tendency to feel sorry and not hold them up to high expectations, but we're really not doing them a favor by doing that.
That's right, absolutely. We need to make sure that we have high expectations and we have the strong belief that students can do on grade level work and to meet those high standards.
Jim, if I may, so one of the things that Emily said over and over and over again was that curriculum and the confidence of your teachers in implementing that curriculum is sort of the bedrock of personalization.
Mm-hmm.
My principals were like, yes, and we're getting a brand new one. So yay. So I think just to know that you're getting a lot on your plate and that who knows what the situation is going to be like in the fall, and to like build in the teaching and the reteaching and the training and the patience and the grace is going to be so important. And the principals helped remind me of that.
Excellent point. Yeah. And I think it was nice to go back to what Emily talked about in terms of, really the starting point for all of this, really the prerequisite, sort of the foundation for all of this is great instruction of a strong curriculum with the support of really supportive relationships with kids. And so the good news is that's a lot of what we've been striving for and working for and working on for a long time. It may look very different in the fall, and it may look very different if we're in a hybrid or remote situation, but hopefully that's what we're ground ourselves in. And we're very good at teaching children and building relationships. And if that's the foundation, then that's a really good start for all of us. And we'll make these shifts and we'll make these transitions together, and we'll be able to serve our students well and hopefully employ some of these personalized learning strategies that we've talked about today. Excellent. Well, I did put the survey link in the chat box, and it is here on the screen as well. And as we wrap up, I just want to make sure to thank the Tennessee Department of Education. I want to thank Tennessee SCORE for their support and sponsorship of the Principal Professional Learning Series. I want to thank our contributors today, Instruction Partners, the Learning Accelerator, the American Institutes for Research, and I definitely want to thank all of you for your participation and engagement today, and especially just listening to the small group conversation, listening to your thoughtful engagement. I just want to thank you for the great work you do for our children. We appreciate and admire your leadership in this extraordinary moment, this unprecedented moment, and we're honored to have the opportunity to work with you and support you through this transition into the new school year. So I thank you, I appreciate you, and I hope you'll join us next week. We're going to talk about the strategic use of resources and how we organize our resources to be able to provide great instruction for all of our students. So again, thank you. We appreciate you, and hope you have a great afternoon. Take care.